Hi, good afternoon. I'm Laura Bueller. I'm the executive director of C100. We are a San Francisco headquartered nonprofit dedicated to advancing Canadian leaders and Canadian entrepreneurs in technology. And it is my pleasure to be interviewing Max Schmeiser this afternoon, a Canadian based out of Seattle. Cannot wait to learn more about you, Max.
Hello, everyone. My name is Max Schmeiser. I'm the head of data science at Twitter. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Fantastic. Now, Max, as you know, meeting global Canadians, especially Canadians who have done such incredible things in their careers in technology, is a bit of a specialty of mine. And we have not met yet. And so this is such an exciting opportunity for me to get to know you. Um, I think we should start where we all start, which is at the very beginning. Just tell us a bit about where you grew up, where you're from. Of course, I should say we're all from the prairies somewhere. I'm from Alberta originally. Where are you from?
Thanks, Laura. So I'm from Saskatchewan. I grew up in Regina, spent most of my childhood there, except for a couple of years in Saskatoon while my father was getting his graduate degree at the U of S. I then went on to the U of R for my undergraduate degree in economics. And after that, it was next to Hamilton, Ontario, McMaster University for a master's degree in economics. And then finally down to Ithaca, New York, and I got a PhD in policy analysis and management or economics, another easier term for it, down there at Cornell University.
So you had a pretty long career in really academia before you ever entered into the technology world. And you mentioned your dad had pursued grad school in Saskatchewan as well. Do you come from a family of academics?
Yes, actually, I think several of my family members have been professors at the University of Saskatchewan, and several others have been professors at other universities. So yeah, it's a pretty common thing in my family. My mother was actually a teacher, and so my father was an ag economist with the government of Saskatchewan. My mom was a teacher, and so being a professor of economics seemed like a natural fit for me. So that's how I ended up in academia to start.
And so tell us a little bit about your PhD, because you actually went from being a PhD to being a professor at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. What was your PhD in?
So I actually did my PhD in health economics of all things, so completely unrelated to anything I've really done since. But yeah, no, I started off, I was actually working on obesity and disability. This was back in '04 to '08 when obesity was a huge issue. And there was a lot of focus, certainly in the policy community, on it. So I actually worked with one of the leading obesity economists at Cornell, and we did a bunch of research related to what drives obesity, what are the causes of obesity, things like that. So yeah, I started off at a very, very different place than I am now.
No kidding. That is so interesting. I feel like we could have a whole other talk just on that. So then, why don't you tell us about your career at the University of Wisconsin at Madison? You were a professor there for how long?
So I was there for almost 3 years. So I joined straight out of my PhD as assistant professor in the consumer science department, teaching personal finance and risk management and economics courses. I actually ended up pivoting my research. This was 2008. We were going through the foreclosure crisis here in the US, the financial crisis in general. And so I actually did most of my research on foreclosures at the time. So I moved to working on foreclosures and then working on personal finance related issues like financial literacy, which was particularly salient in light of the financial crisis, mostly driven by household finances. And yeah, so I spent 2.5 years there teaching, doing this type of research. And it was actually through a conference I helped to organize related to financial literacy that I ended up meeting my subsequent boss at the Federal Reserve Board.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. If this is what took you to the U.S. Federal Reserve Board. Okay, so what were you hired to do at the U.S. Federal Reserve Board? This is a big shift and a big pivot for you in your career. What drove you to that decision, and what were you hired to do?
Yeah, it's funny. They actually employ a surprising number of microeconomists, applied microeconomists. They do a lot of work around consumer financial regulation, real estate finance. They do microeconomic surveys of household wealth. And so I actually was hired into a division that focused mostly on consumer financial well-being. It was actually the precursor to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was formed shortly after I joined the Fed, or at least officially formed shortly after I joined the Fed. And so I was actually hired, so I was doing work on financial literacy and the impact of foreclosures, especially on vulnerable populations. And just so happened the Federal Reserve Board was doing a lot of work in this area. Obviously, during the financial crisis, there was a lot of concern about household financial well-being. What was going on with foreclosures, that was a crisis that persisted for years after, the original set of mortgage defaults. We had a high foreclosure rate for several years afterwards. And so they actually were looking for somebody to join a more consumer-focused or household-focused unit. And my work on financial literacy and foreclosures was exactly what they were looking for. So, serendipitously, I met my boss at this conference. She mentioned this role was available during that conference. I applied, ended up getting it, and it was just too exciting an opportunity to turn down, especially at that time, given that the Fed was charged at that point with writing a whole bunch of consumer financial regulations. It's funny, I remember one of my first meetings there, I was actually working on writing out the formulas banks would use to underwrite mortgages in the future. I was working with the lawyers, and we were literally just like supporting them as economists in terms of writing up the legislation or the regulations that would govern how banks issue mortgages going forward.
So what changed based on the new regulations that you wrote, or the new policies that you recommended?
So in terms of the regulations I helped to write, it was mostly just increasing the standards under which you could get mortgages. So it just made it more difficult to get a mortgage, or you had to have, you could get a lower mortgage amount given the same income and assets. More broadly, a lot of my work ended up really focusing on the financial literacy aspect and and financial education and the value of financial education. Actually, some of the biggest impact I had was related to financial education. I did some research with a colleague, Carly Urban, and Christina Stoddard at Montana State University. Carly was one of my grad students at the University of Wisconsin. She went on to be a professor at Montana State. And we ended up finding what types of financial education in high school were particularly effective at improving subsequent credit scores and financial behaviors. And as a result, a number of states actually passed improved financial education, or actually passed financial education. That was mostly thanks to Carly, because by the time that research really got out there and really got going, I had moved on to a tech company, and my time for research was non-existent at that point.
Right. So that is super interesting. I just want to ask if you could weight the impact on outcomes, microeconomic outcomes, the prosperity of American homes. If you could weight how much of it is policy and how much of it is independent financial literacy of households, I should say.
It's a good question. I think it's a fair mix. Obviously, the structures, the regulations that you put in place on the financial institutions, what products they're allowed to sell, under what conditions, under what terms, under what disclosures, that does have a tremendous effect on people's ability to choose the right products for themselves and make the right financial decisions. Obviously, we have a general lack of solid financial education. But in a lot of cases, financial products are extremely complicated, and it's very easy to bury terms in the very, disadvantageous terms to the consumer in those long pages that you sign in terms of regulations or terms and conditions for the credit products or other financial products. So I think there's a major role to be played for regulation and ensuring that consumers have the right information and it's in a clear and simple format, and that banks aren't doing anything egregious or financial institutions aren't doing anything egregious in terms of how they interact with their customers. But there is definitely a financial literacy component where consumers have to have a certain baseline level of literacy in order to function and use this information.
I want to ask you one more question about this, because I know your next leap in your career is fascinating as well. But I just think this is such an interesting topic, and you're clearly an expert here. If you can go back to your time, looking at your research you were doing, and then what you were hired to do at the U.S. Federal Reserve, did you ever learn anything about households that surprised you? Yeah.
I think there was like a regular set of learnings from my experiences. One that's really stuck with me, and it makes me smile every time I actually launched a survey of household finances that the Fed does annually, the survey of household economics and decision making. And one of the questions we added to that was this question about could you come up with $400 to cover an emergency expense? And the share of Americans, especially at that time, that couldn't even come up with $400 without borrowing or selling something or going to a relative was remarkable. And so that shocked me. I think there was just a continuous stream of learnings about how many people live in very precarious financial situations, and how the loss of even one paycheck can really set them back. And so I got exposure to that a number of different ways, from the research I was doing to the surveys I helped to conduct. There's a lot of learning about just like how fragile the finances of a lot of Americans were.
Max, that survey, I'm familiar with what you're talking about, because I hear entrepreneurs quote it all the time. So thank you for your contribution to the Global Brain Trust on this really important issue of, financial security and financial literacy. I had no idea that a guy from Regina was behind it. So thank you. Yeah, that's an incredible piece of data. I think it's spurred a ton of innovation in technology and user, technology addressing savings, household finance, payday, taking down the payday loans companies. I mean, it's incredible the amount of focus that we've seen on banking for the average person really in the last 10, 15 years. And part of it is because of your research. So, okay, let's take it to the next thing here. So you were pulled out of the reserve to none other than Amazon. Why did Amazon recruit you? What were you recruited to do at Amazon?
So Amazon was in the process of building out its economics team back in 2015. They'd hired Pat Barry a few years earlier to be their chief economist at Amazon. And he'd hired up a few other economists, mostly fresh out of grad school, to help start off the economics team at Amazon. They actually ended up reaching out to me, so they emailed me at my Federal Reserve email. They've basically just been looking for people in prestigious government institutions who had a lot of publications, or assistant professors who were nearing the tenure decision point. And they're just trying to recruit some more senior economists who they thought might do well at tech companies. So they actually ended up reaching out twice. I ignored the first email, and then my now wife ended up prompting me to actually respond to them. She's like, "You love Amazon. You use like everything Amazon. You should go and work for them, or she at least talk to them." She didn't know that Amazon was based in Seattle at the time. She figured it was somewhere on the East Coast. So when she found out I was flying to Seattle, she was a little surprised, since she'd never been there. I'd never been there. So that was a bit of an interesting one. But so I joined Amazon. I flew out, interviewed, and they made me an offer to join a team that I just couldn't refuse. It was Amazon Lending, which was basically a fintech startup within Amazon. It was like 25, maybe 30 people on the team. And Amazon runs its units pretty independently. They're basically like a bunch of small businesses within a larger corporation. And so it's the opportunity to join a fintech startup and get the protections of having a big company behind you. So it seemed less risky than jumping into an actual startup, but also a great opportunity to apply all the things I'd learned from the research and regulatory side to the real world and just see what the real world looked like, or what the other side of the table looked like. And so given that opportunity, I just had to take it. I figured there was, I could probably jump back to the Federal Reserve or academia pretty easily afterwards. I figured worst case scenario, I did like a 1-year stint at Amazon, got some real world experience, and could take that to being a professor and teaching about real world experience.
Which of course you haven't done. You've spent your whole career since then in the private sector, right?
Yeah, I have this dream I'll retire and go teach at some point. But yeah, it's definitely once I got here, I just loved the pace. I loved the impact, and so I just couldn't imagine going back, at least not for a while, to the same kind of pace you had in academia or in government. So yeah, so that's what's kept me here.
So it's kind of a dream, right? You're an academic, you're an economist, you've gotten exposure to the Fed, and now Amazon is coming to you. And it's not just as an economist, you're the chief economist and head of data science for their lending team. And you probably had huge data sets to work with. Am I right in assuming that Amazon's probably got great data sets compared to most companies? Uh, what what did you actually do there? So what were you looking at solving?
Yeah, and I actually wasn't hired in with that title. Like most things in tech, I started off at a more junior level. I was a senior economist
Okay.
and came in and was an individual contributor for all of a few months before I ended up having people reporting to me. The team was growing like crazy. And they wanted to give me people to help me scale. I was originally hired in to do risk management for the team, and I was one of, I think, the third scientist hired on the team under the general science, category, and that included economists. And yeah, so I helped work on the credit models. I helped do risk management for the business, and analyzing our loan portfolio and the risks and reporting on that. And then, yeah, moved into management pretty quickly, and just sort of over the course of a couple of years, kept acquiring new teams or getting to hire a bunch of people to expand my team into new areas. And so, yeah, just ended up moving up, getting promoted. The chief economist title is just something like they called me. It's not like that was, it was
Right,
anything more
right,
than a
right.
business title. But yeah, so I basically just ran the economics and data science team for lending, I started one for marketplace, and then for the invoicing business as well.
So it's a big job, and Amazon's lending business, it may not be a business that that everyone's familiar with and interacts with on a daily basis, especially here in this group. Maybe AWS, maybe of course the store. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what challenges you overcame there as the chief economist, and sort of
Sure.
especially from a data perspective, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a really rough adjustment, I guess, going from an academic role to a fast-paced tech role. I must say, for the first 2 weeks, I was wondering what the heck I'd done, and was thinking I made the worst mistake of my life because I just got thrown right
Really?
into it, which is what Amazon does. Oh yeah, no, I was thrown right into it ahead of a quarterly business review with our VP, and had to like start writing up the risk section like as soon as I joined. Amazon's great about they literally give you like your first morning training, hand you your laptop, and they basically say like good luck. And so yeah, and that was a fun time to join. And so just in terms of overcoming things, I mean, we were a scrappy startup effectively, and so just making sure our data were all captured correctly, making sure we had the basic metrics we needed to monitor our business, especially the risks in our portfolio. And then there was so much to be done in terms of understanding, like, we gave out these loans to the small businesses that sold on Amazon Marketplace. Okay, it's great that we made some money off of the interest from them, but what other impact does it have? Does it benefit the marketplace overall? Amazon's famous for its sort of flywheel philosophy in terms of how its business operates. And so they really wanted to know, what was the flywheel effect of the lending business? So that was one of the early things I did, was just estimating the causal effect of our lending program on Amazon Marketplace sales and inventory and things like that. And then just helping to responsibly grow the business over the next couple of years. But yeah, those are the main data challenges we face, which is
Right.
one, just getting the right data, clean data, improving our models, and then just understanding the impact of our business on the broader marketplace.
So, and as if it wasn't enough to go from academia into Amazon, which is this uh, quite a fast-growing, aggressive private sector company. Then you moved into the startup world, right? So you shifted into startup. Tell us a little bit about Convoy. What does Convoy do?
So Convoy is a digital freight network, and they hate using this, but it's basically like an Uber for freight, because there is an actual Uber Freight, so they hate that comparison, but it's a pretty apt one. Basically, it lets truck drivers, all the independent truck drivers out there in the U.S. And some in Canada, or they do have some business in Canada. Basically, they can just open up the app, and it'll find shipments for them. They can scroll through a long list. This is a huge innovation on the usual approach, which is basically brokers calling a phone tree of 100 truckers that they know and keeping their Rolodex. A lot of this business, certainly earlier on, was done via phone and fax machine. Convoy was trying to revolutionize that by using the app, using the GPS in the app to track the shipments, using the app to upload all the documents, things like that. So basically, you can manage all your shipments on your phone instead of having to do wait for phone calls or call around and look for shipments, or look them up on load boards and call the brokers and negotiate. It was all meant to be done in app and make it much more expedient for truckers to match to freight.
So what excited you about jumping ship into going to work at a startup? And I should say startup, we're talking to a lot of startups today. At this time, Convoy must have been valued at over $1 billion. So it's not like, three of you and a laptop. It's an established startup, but it's still a high risk industry and an independent private company. So can you tell us about why you were excited to join Convoy?
Sure. Yeah. So I started talking to them before they closed their Series C round. They ended up raising, I think, 187 million, mostly from Capital G, T. Rowe Price, a bunch of other investors. But they needed a head of data science. They were obviously planning for a massive growth after their Series C. They had, I think, almost 300 people when I joined the team, and the data science team itself had 8 or 10 people. And so I joined Convoy, and I guess I really just wanted to experience startup life, like real startup life, as opposed to sort of Amazon startup life. I'd always been fascinated by startups. And I also, especially in this case, being head of data science, I really wanted to take all I had learned at Amazon, being one of the first economists, building a number of data science teams, getting to experience all the things you do to build a culture of science and data at a company, and build the culture of an actual team of scientists. And so I really wanted to do that in a blank slate environment. Convoy at the time in the HR department was one guy with a spreadsheet. So it really was a pretty young company, and there was a lot of opportunity to just
like data science. I have to ask you, was the data science organization also like one guy and a spreadsheet, or what was there for you when you landed to work with?
Yeah, so there were 8 people. They had an interim head of data science, one of their existing team members, and they had a bunch of other team members, 7 or so team members in addition to him. They were kind of just spread out across all different parts of the product and engineering organization, mostly doing work on the data warehouse and analytics. But ironically, a lot of them were PhDs in various fields, and their expertise was machine learning. So their primary expertise was largely going to waste, given that most of their work related to dealing with dumpster fires in our data warehouse and just trying to produce basic metrics and reporting.
Okay. So what did you learn at Convoy? What were you actually, what did you solve?
Yeah, so my primary focus was hiring, but I needed to basically solve everything around that. Again,
as every startup.
Yeah, and this wasn't like a trivial growth. Like I hired over 80 people in the course of 16 or 18 months to join the data science organization at Convoy, and so we had to prepare to hire at scale. And so, I came in and I had 20 some open positions that hadn't been filled already. And then on top of that, we basically got quarterly allocations of headcount, which was in line with our sort of financial projections and growth plan. And so I just basically had to plan and figure out how to ramp from 8 people to, our original target was 40 some people. And, I thought like that would be a stretch for our first year. I think we were well over 60 people by the time that first year came around. But yeah, I had to figure out like our interview process. I obviously I had to do things like change the names from data scientist and data analyst to research scientist and data scientist to be more competitive in the market we were operating in Seattle.
Really? That's interesting.
And so, yeah, there's just a lot that went into like figuring out how do I hire this many people at scale? How do we, Seattle at that time especially didn't have a ton of startups. And so people were much more used to working at Microsoft or Amazon or Facebook or Google or other tech companies that have large offices in the area. And so getting the people in Seattle to come to a startup was certainly a little challenging. And so, yeah, so all the stuff that went around that, in addition to just helping grow the company, yeah.
So I just think that's so interesting, right? You're an economist. You're used to running huge, insightful analyses that guide decision making, and now you're thrown into this position where probably 50%, maybe 75%, or even the way you describe it, maybe closer to 100%, is spent recruiting and hiring. That is a learning curve, right? So, I mean, what did you learn just about people and building teams through your time at Convoy? This is fascinating.
Yeah, so I'd actually been pretty heavily involved in hiring at Amazon. For context, I think when I joined, we had fewer than 30 economists, and by the time I left, we had over 200 PhD economists. And I interviewed probably at least half of them myself, or I was involved in their interviews. And I probably hired a good quarter of them myself onto my teams, or something close to that. So I'd done a fair bit of hiring at scale, but Amazon had a very established process and support for that. So I had that to rely on as a framework. And Convoy tried to do a lot of things like Amazon, since most of the people there had come from Amazon. So basically just adopting some of the Amazon hiring practices. But in terms of, I guess, team building, I'd certainly had that experience in lending, and then in Connections, which was my second role at Amazon, where I had to rebuild their data science organization. So there were learnings from both of those experiences. One, like growing a team from basically scratch. The other one, taking over a team that had some challenges and rebuilding it, that I could put in place as I started to scale out the team at Convoy. But yeah, a lot of it was just like, management practices for the interviews, not trying to burden anyone too much with the interview process. Our onboarding process had to be streamlined incredibly well. We went with a buddy system where everyone who joined got a data science buddy to help them out for the first couple months. We also had this onboarding wiki that we updated with every new hire to just add more and more information. And so we basically created all these resources to make sure we could onboard people as quickly as possible and at scale. We operated in a pod model where we have data scientists embedded with product managers and engineers and designers. And we were able to leverage those partner functions to help scale up our team. So where we were putting people where there were no data scientists to begin with, they'd have a buddy or mentor in a adjacent team, but they might not have any data science team members in their immediate pod. And so we really relied on the engineering partners, product partners to help ramp them up when we were small. Obviously, as the teams grew, we were able to provide more data science support within each pod and have that context from the data scientists that they could share. So, I'm sure countless learnings along the way, everything from managing pay bands and revising pay bands to, like I said, changing the titles to be more competitive, to managing the interview process, and just thinking about how you onboard people at that scale and that speed.
Yeah.
What functions do you need? I added the economist job function. I added the operations research science job function so that we could, specialize people. I added the data engineering job function. I really wanted to hire people who are experts in their areas and have people, specialize. Obviously, I'm an economist by training. I certainly appreciate, specialization of labor. I've certainly employed that in all the teams I've joined, where I've had, highly skilled people doing specific tasks, and certainly giving them opportunities for growth. And for professional development, but hiring in people who are experts in data engineering, database administration, hiring in people who are experts in analytics, metrics, SQL, hiring people who are experts in machine learning, who are experts in optimization, and obviously, economists who can do, whether it's, causal inference and experimentation or forecasting or empirical IO.
Max, one thing we're not going to touch on you've recently now been recruited to Twitter to lead data science for Twitter, which is an incredible, super impactful opportunity for you. We won't get into that because we're running out of time, but I am curious, we've got all these people with us here today who are running really small, for the most part, quite small organizations. You just mentioned all of these specialized, highly specialized skills in terms of data science, economists and other analysts. If you're speaking directly today to some of the startup founders in our audience, what should they know about data science at the stage they're at now? Do they need to hire a team of economists and data scientists, or are there some simple things they can put in place early that will actually set them up for success?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely recommend not jumping straight to PhDs when you're hiring your first data scientists. Usually you'll end up overpaying them and using them for some pretty mundane tasks, which will make them very dissatisfied as well. So it's usually not a good fit. Generally, when you're a startup, first thing is just capture your data. Far too often, teams are being scrappy, they're moving fast, and they don't really think about like, okay, let's capture our data in a usable format, or let's log appropriately. And once those data are gone, they're gone for good. And so, even if you're just dumping those data in a relatively unstructured format, it's good to just preserve data and instrument your software or whatever you're working on, so that you do have it, a year later, 2 years later, to go back to and analyze. And in addition to just capturing your data, I always strongly recommend hire, if you can do it yourself, great, or if someone on your team can do it, great, but hire an analyst, hire someone who can help you develop basic metrics, success criteria for your business, an understanding of what drives your top line success metrics, and who can do the reporting and basic SQL and analytics that you always need as a company. Like, you need a basic understanding of your business, your customers, how they behave, your growth, accounting, all that stuff. And so get those basics down first. Make sure you have the data captured, it's in a usable format, you have your metrics and reporting down. And then once you're in that state and you have clearly identified problems that you need an expert to solve, then I would recommend hiring a PhD, someone who does machine learning or optimization, or an economist to do, say, causal inference, evaluate the impact of the various programs you launch, the features you launch, things like that.
Right.
Usually I think of the profession as you do the analytics, the metrics, the reporting, capturing the data. And then usually you want to evaluate what you're doing and see if, like, the new feature you launch, the new website you launch, the new whatever, is it actually improving whatever your success criteria are, whatever your business outcome is.
Right.
Does it actually, is it positive? And just understanding that relationship in a causal way, as opposed to just looking at correlations. So you really understand where to put your resources, how to invest to ensure the best outcome for your business. So I usually think of that progression. Then you can get into machine learning and all the other stuff once you have clear use cases for those tools.
And I guess a quick note on Twitter, because when we had talked about this in advance, one of the things that you had mentioned to me that I just hadn't even thought about was all of the things that data really should be for. And we should be using data science for. So I'm wondering if you could just inspire us a little bit by listing off some of the things that you think companies should be collecting data for and using, data science and economics to analyze and make decisions on, that maybe we aren't already thinking about.
Sure. Yeah, I think, you probably think of a lot of use cases, and I've gone through a couple, but I've seen data science used in every aspect of a business. I've seen it used extensively in HR to help predict attrition, to figure out, people's incentive structures and what'll cause, what'll make them happier, what can make them more efficient. Our daily employee pulse survey Connections that I helped to run, we had some huge wins in terms of productivity at Amazon by reducing number of meetings people attended, the effectiveness of those meetings, identifying teams that had bad hardware, bad computers that weren't meeting their needs. We had a team that was had really cheap laptops but were working on CAD software, and they were losing 20% of their work every week to computer crashes, and we got them new computers. So you can get a lot of insights about your company through data, and your team members through data. You can use it to optimize hiring. If you're hiring at scale, get some insights into the right fits, especially for high volume, high attrition roles, anything in customer service or operations. You can get a good sense for who are the good fits, who sticks around. Obviously, FP&A, financial planning and analysis, you can use people to do forecasting, improve the accuracy of your forecasts, and how you project things out into the future. And then I mean, you can think of so many of the tasks people do as something that could potentially be automated. Certainly, any repetitive tasks as things that could be automated, or decisions that could be automated with machine learning. Things you can optimize with operations research. Just the queues your support people work through. You can optimize those. You can order those calls or those support tickets in a way that helps people get through them optimally. So there's so many applications of data. It's rare to find a place where you can't leverage data. To have a big impact on the company.
Yeah. Max Schmeisser, Head of Data Science at Twitter, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to go over to Q&A now.
All right, thanks so much, Laura. Looking forward to the Q&A.